This is an LMC Media Community Conversation. I'm Maura Carlin. Our guest is college advisor Laura Baldasare. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. So for those who don't know, what exactly does a private college advisor do? And how is that different from a school guidance counselor?
So a private college advisor really has your student as front and center in his or her agenda. College counselors are wonderful. They have so many students that they're working with, and they also have a protocol that's set by the high school that they are at. And it's just not possible to really get the same kind of one-on-one personal attention. Every student is so different in so many ways. And they are very overworked, and this is not the only thing that they do in a high school. So when people come to someone like me, it is to really get that one-on-one, very personalized attention, getting to know the student, getting to know someone who knows the colleges, who knows how to help choose the right colleges and help a student prepare to be the most competitive they can be for the colleges they're interested in.
So are you directing them to, you should look at this school or that school, or are you actually calling the colleges on their behalf?
So students usually will come to me, and I very often work with kids because I do test prep stuff as well. So my students are usually with me for about a year and a half. And so we start working through the whole test prep process together. So I get to know my kids really, really well by the time we start putting together a college list, which is usually around February of their junior year. And they usually have an idea, we don't know where that idea comes from, of a few colleges that, maybe it's from mom and dad, maybe it's something that they heard someplace, maybe it's something they've always dreamed of. Sometimes they have absolutely no idea. We talk a little bit about what they think they might want to study. And I'll get a few names from them of schools that they think they're interested in. And from that, I usually will build out a list of about 20 schools for them to take a look at. I want to make sure that students are looking at big schools and little schools, rural schools and city schools, all different kinds of things to really get an understanding of what the differences are. That was part one. Second part of that question, I'm sorry, was?
I actually don't recall. So let's move on to another aspect of this. Working with someone for a year and a half can't be inexpensive, but I know that you take on pro bono students who could use the guidance. Tell us about that.
So the pro bono students that I've worked with and where I came to that, because I have been working for a very long time with my practice. And actually it's some of my students who came to me at one time or another to say, what about kids who can't afford a private counselor like you? Like, how do they, because it is such a process, and you really do need to know the ins and outs, and you need to know how to work through the system. And they very rightly ask, like, what happens for somebody who doesn't have someone like you? And I started to think about that. And actually, I saw the truth behind that. And I started to do some research on finding organizations that worked with students who didn't have what maybe was required to find someone like me. My path took me a few years ago to a wonderful, wonderful organization called Yonkers Partners in Education. And I had reached out to them and said, you know what, I would like to take 3 students pro bono a year, and I would work with them through the whole process. And that's what I'd like to do. And so they sort of went through their student base and asked who was interested. And I started to work with 3 students, my first 3 students. And it was an amazing experience. And I'm happy to say they are all juniors now. One is at Dartmouth, and these are all first-gen low-income minority kids who didn't have this sort of path available to them. So one is at Dartmouth, one is at UPenn, one is at Worcester Polytechnic, and all are at those schools pretty much pro bono. So because of test scores, because of different programs that are available for these kids to be able to finance, not even finance, because they're getting scholarships for their education. And that worked so wonderfully that I said, I'll take 3 more. And so the next year, the same thing. And I eventually did sort of step in, and I worked with Yonkers YPI for a couple of years, working with a lot of kids through this whole process. I then stepped back into my private practice full time, and I am now going to do the same kind of thing. So it's really my going out and finding organizations and saying, I want to work with these kids. In addition,
you're finding that having the private advisor actually has made a difference.
A total difference, because schools are so overworked. We know that these people are wonderful. They give everything that they have, but at some schools, a guidance counselor is case managing 500 kids. How is each one of those kids going to get that kind of personal attention? And that's all kids. Guidance counselors have a huge cohort of students. Also, I get to know my kids really, really, really well. And if a student will sit down to me and say, I've got to go to the University of Michigan, I've just got to go there. Why? I don't know, because everybody else is going there and I really got to go there. And I'll say, well, you know what? I think a smaller liberal arts school might be something we should look at, because I think that might be something you would be more in. No. And that will happen. I have a student at Barnard who I think is graduating this year, who that was the last thing. I don't want a girls' school. I don't want to go to a spa. I don't want to. And I actually went and took some other students on a campus tour there, and she happened to be the one leading the tour, and brought me to tears, because at the very end of the tour she announced to everybody in the group, I love Barnard. This is like the best school for me, and I fought tooth and nail not to have it on my list, but my college advisor is here on this tour today, and I want to just tell her she was right. This was great. I gave it a try. So it's knowing your students.
So what has been the college application process in the pandemic? It's very different. You can't go see the schools. You're really limited, and the virtual tours just are not the same.
They are not the same. And my initial response to your question was not that different in most ways. Again, because first of all, you're still going through. So my kids now that I've had all this past year are getting all of their acceptances now, and it's a very exciting time. All of my students tested. They took their SATs.
They did.
Oh, absolutely.
And did they submit the scores?
Absolutely, they submitted the scores, and they are getting. And now I'm not talking about pro bono. I'm talking about my students. My regular students are not only getting into schools that they might not have otherwise gotten into, but they're getting in with nice financial packages. Very nice, and largely because they tested. A lot of the sort of conversation out there was go test optional. Nobody needs to send tests this year. Just make it easy on yourself. You don't need to do it. My kids did it. And not only did they do it, but many of them took 4 tests, 5 tests, because my kids also start a little earlier. So they had 1 test in by March of their junior year or April.
Right, so before the pandemic hit.
But then they kept on trying and going, and my kids tested as soon as things started opening up. I want to start saying October, November, December, they were taking SATs and ACTs in college, in testing centers where they were available. And I am convinced that, as are the parents of these kids, that they're getting the results that they got, because we know how competitive it all is. You have applications, and then you have a couple of students who went above and beyond, who went through what it took to test and to take more than 1 test. And it showed a commitment. The more selective colleges, the more competitive colleges, it absolutely made a difference. And it made a difference, again, in the merit scholarships that they got from those schools.
Okay, so how can people reach you if they're interested in your services?
The best thing to do probably is to send me an email, which is lbcollegeprep@gmail.com. And I would be more than happy to talk to anyone about the process, about this crazy time, which is another really important thing that I do want to just mention quickly, that a college advisor brings to the table, a personal one. We all know how anxiety producing this is, particularly during this particular year. But in general, it is one of the most anxiety producing times for a college student or for a prospective college student. And really knowing your kids, and now I teach them yoga breathing sometimes. I teach them ways to manage the process. The parents, I have parents will say to me, like, I want to still meet with you for coffee after my kid is in college, because I still am going to need to know, how to handle stuff.
Well,
So,
everyone can always use someone to talk to.
yes.
So Laura,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for joining us.
You're very
Welcome to
welcome.
another college season.
Thank you. My pleasure.